sit down and estimate the cost to see if he has enough money to complete it? For if he lays the foundations, not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule him, saying, "This fellow began to build, but was not able to finish." Or suppose the king is about to go to war against another king. Will he not sit down and consider whether he is able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he is not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off, and will ask for terms of peace. In the same way, any of you who does not give up everything he has cannot be led astray.
This is from a company that no longer exists, but years ago I had started to dabble a little bit in financial services, and it happened to be with this company. No, I didn't have anything to do with why they don't exist anymore. Just thought I'd make that clear. But you notice the thinker here, and they're saying think first and invest. That's where I got the idea for the title of this lesson this morning, is to think first, then decide before becoming a Christian. Subtitle would be to count the cost. And we've been doing this series where we're looking at how, as a Christian, we need to be thinkers. We need to be thinking about what we believe, why we believe it, and also about telling others, because that's why the church exists, is the gospel. Now, some of you may remember this man, Timothy Leary, from the 60s, long since passed away, but he had this to say about thinking, that I'd just like to see thinking come back in style, wouldn't we all? I haven't heard a new idea in 8 years. I'm not real sure when he said this. But let's get ordinary people arguing and talking again. I want to trigger new circuits in their nervous system. That's the philosopher's job, and I am the most important philosopher at this time. It sounds like it. Some of you may remember G. Gordon Liddy of Watergate fame, where he raided a farm that Leary was renting one time and led to a trial, and then those two ended up touring together and doing speeches and things together before Leary passed away. I think it was in the late 90s. But that's the idea. As Christians, we need to be thinking. We looked the first time that we don't check our brains at the door. Paul, remember, we used Paul on Mars Hill a couple of weeks ago to look at how when he was in Athens, he went into the synagogues on the Sabbaths because he knew he'd have an audience there and talked to them about Jesus. And then on Mars Hill, while he's waiting for Timothy and Silas, he got into a debate using the altar to the unknown God. Okay, you've got this altar here to an unknown God. Well, let me tell you about this unknown God. And then we looked at two people who had questions. John the Baptist in prison. Is this Jesus? Is he the one that's supposed to be the Messiah? Is he who I think he is? Hey guys, would you go ask him? And two of his men went to talk to Jesus. Jesus said, well, go back and tell them what you've seen. You know, the blind can see, the lame walk. And they went back and reported. And then we have Doubting Thomas. Doubting Thomas was questioning Jesus. Thomas, we've seen the Lord. Yeah, well, unless I can see the nail scars and put my hand or see the spear where the spear went into it, I'm not going to believe. How come we don't have Doubting Peter and Doubting John? Because remember, they all doubted. But it's okay to ask questions. That's what we looked at there that week. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to be curious. It's okay to study and to doubt and to ask the question. Ask your question. Don't let the doubt get the best of you. Ask your question. Last week we looked at God using a skeptic. Sarah, when she was told, or Abraham was told, I'm going to be back here in a year, your wife is going to have a child. She's going to conceive and have a child. And Sarah's listening, and she, yeah, right. Why did you laugh? Who, me? Well, I didn't laugh. Yeah, you laughed. And eventually, of course, she did have a child. But she was very skeptical of the whole thing. Kind of like sometimes with Christianity, some people look at it like when we go, have you ever bought a used car? We've probably all bought a used car at one time or another. It looked pristine. The paint is nice. You get in it, the upholstery's all nice, and good, and then you get behind the wheel, you decide to buy it, drive it off the lot, there it drops about $500 in value. And then you drive it around some, and then all of a sudden it starts belching smoke. It's not starting right, the transmission's slipping, radiator's blowing, and then all of a sudden, this isn't what I bargained for. I don't want to have this car anymore. Some people treat Christianity that way. What do I mean by that? They get the idea in their heads, if I become a Christian, my problems are going to all be solved. And I've had a few people who have approached me with that idea. I even might have told you, a friend of mine who said, she was talking to a teenager who was having a lot of problems at home, and Christians don't have problems. Isn't that right, Steve? And I said, well, I don't think I would say that. Because here's the thing. As a Christian person, let's just say they come down this morning, they're baptized into Christ, they go home. There's that pile of bills sitting there on the kitchen table that they left there this morning when they came here. It's still sitting there. They don't know where they're going to get the money to pay them. That obnoxious neighbor who likes to blast the stereo on the weekends at 2 in the morning. I had one of those once. He's still going to be blasting his stereo. The boss at work who gets on your nerves is still going to be there, getting on your nerves. But what being a Christian does is it gives us the opportunity, it gives us a new way to look at these problems and a new way to handle them. It doesn't take them away. It just gives us better ways to handle them. But when some people want to kind of test drive their Christianity, they start having problems and then they go, well, this isn't helping me any, so I'm just done with it. I'm not gonna pursue it anymore. That's the wrong reason to become a Christian is just to have all your problems solved. Life's problems are still there. We still have to deal with the same things that we dealt with before. We just have a different way to deal with them. I want to continue in this. Keep your Bibles open to Luke. Looking at this idea, thinking first, then deciding, counting the cost. What is it going to cost me to become a Christian? We looked a little bit at, started to get into this in the Sunday school class, because this is part of the lesson that we're going to continue next week. But let's look at this tower, first of all, and starting in verse 28. That tower is a pretty straightforward teaching. If you're following along in the outline, this is our first stop. We have to count the cost before following Jesus. You got to count the cost of anything before you can buy it. Yeah, I know. If you have to ask how much it costs, you probably can't afford it. Yeah, that could be. But I'll bet even somebody like a Warren Buffett occasionally asks the price of something. Why? Because people like him don't get to be billionaires by wasting their money. They make smart purchases and smart investments. So he's going to want to make a smart investment. That's what we have to do here when we are looking at becoming a Christian. An investment, it's our life, it's going to be our eternity. And so we got to make sure we count that cost. See, the farmer needed the tower. That's not the issue. The issue is he didn't stop to think about the cost. And a lot of times we don't think about the cost either of big ticket items. Sometimes we bought 2 houses, and on one of them we sat down. We kind of knew the mortgage officer anyway, and she could talk straight with us. And we did all the math and submitted all of our income and got the math and everything. And this was several years ago. We qualified for then about $1,100 a month in a house payment, which now you couldn't get anything for that. But she said, okay, think about this. She said, you qualify for $1,100 a month in a house payment. Now, you do what you want to do. You can go and get a house where you have that payment, or you can go a little less. She said, consider this. She said, I like to have my house, this was in Colorado, where we were living. She said, in the wintertime, I like to have my house heated. And I like to air condition it in the summer. And I like to occasionally go out to eat. And I like to buy anniversary and Christmas and birthday presents for my husband and for my daughter. And I'd like to decorate the house and do that kind of thing. And she said, if you push yourself to the limit, you're not going to be able to do all of that. And I said, well, yeah, that makes sense. So what do we have to do? We had to assess the cost, assess our priorities. That's what Jesus is telling us to do here. Assess the cost, assess your priorities. Don't get in over your head. The consequence of not considering the cost. Well, look at the tower here. First of all, he couldn't finish it. Secondly, he's going to get mocked by others. Now just think, you buy a house, you buy a car, you can't keep up the payments. Yeah, well, you're not going to keep it for the payment period, and then people are going to say, well, what was he thinking? Yeah, Mr. Farmer, what were you thinking when you started to build that tower and you couldn't finish it? Did you stop to think about the cost of the material, the cost of labor? And maybe like we've had in the last few years, supply issues, which jack the prices of things up. Building a tower represents the purpose and the wish to be a disciple. Yes, I want to be a Christian. I want to know more about it. But then counting the costs, I have to consider the requirements. What are the requirements? And I'm not talking just here, believe, repent, confess, be baptized. I'm not talking just that. What comes after that? Oh, live faithfully. Okay, great. What does that mean? You ever stop to think about that? What does it mean for me to live faithfully? Well, does that mean I might have to quit my job or get a new job? Well, yeah, if you're dealing with blackjack at the casino or you're running a saloon, yeah, that you're going to have to make some career choices there. And what if I'm living with somebody and we're not married? Well, you're going to have to think about that situation too and make it come in line with what the scriptures teach us. You see, we got to be able to meet these requirements. Kind of, not really the word I like to use, but that's the best I can come up with, is the requirements. What does the Bible say? What do I need to do to live as it wants me to? That is part of counting the cost. That's part of making that change, is counting the cost. And then look at this war that he talks about. Now, nobody really likes war, but here you got a king with 10,000, and he's got an army of 20,000 approaching. See, it's illustrating both counting the cost of following Jesus and also not following Jesus. Because there's a cost to not following Jesus, too. That one you're really going to see in eternity. When you are standing before God, you did not accept the salvation gift he offered, now you're going to be in eternal trouble. And he wants us to understand the cost of not following him as well. See, the king with 10,000 soldiers, there's someone here who wants to become a disciple. But the king with 20,000 troops would then represent God, and fighting God is going to lead to failure. You're not going to win that one. You're not going to win it. So you've got to get terms. What terms do we get? Well, guess who gets to lay out the terms? Remember that when it comes to negotiation, you always want to negotiate from a position of strength. How much strength do we have against when we're negotiating with God or trying to? Not a whole lot, do we? What are we going to offer God? Because in negotiations, I'm probably going to give up something. And you're like, if using a house as an example, if I'm going to buy your house, we're going to negotiate, you're probably going to give up something, I'm going to give up something. You come down a little in the price, I come up a little, we do some other thing. What are we going to offer God to give up? We don't have anything to give him, do we? God, I can give you a few extra bucks every week in the collection plate. Do you think that's going to impress God? God, let's see, I've got a piece of land, I can sell some of the land. Yeah, I own the cattle on 1,000 hills, and the fullness of the earth is the Lord's. Okay, let's see, there's nothing there, right? So what am I going to offer? Nothing. That means that when it comes to God, guess who gets to call the shots? Guess who gets to set the conditions? Yeah, God does. So if there's something in there that I don't like, well, one of two things. I've either got to change my mind and accept it as God has given it, or I just have to walk away. I can't change the gospel. I can't change what it says. That's not going to work. God has given us the plan of salvation. He has told us what he expects. That's what we have. In this, back up a second. In this illustration here of the soldiers, the war, the king is not, with 10,000 soldiers, is not in the same position as the one with 20,000. The king building, or the farmer building the tower, he's got an option. He doesn't have to build it. But the king, who's got a bigger army coming against him, he's got to make some choices. He's got to negotiate. He doesn't have really anything there. But we have to make the decision whether or not we are going to follow Jesus. Which means then that we've got to think and to study. That's his whole point. Before committing to Christ, know what you're getting yourself into. know what it all entails. Because I think a lot of people have made Christianity into like a country club. We kind of go there some days, kind of like going down and having brunch. And when kids are baptized, it's almost like we're treating it just as a rite of passage because they're supposed to do it. Why? Well, because they've been going to church here all their life. A lot of times I don't think have grounded a lot of our children and a lot of people that we study with, grounded them in the faith before they are baptized, so that they do understand the cost that's going into it. And not being a fully devoted disciple is choosing to fight against Jesus and his cause, because you got to be for or against him. You can't try and walk down the middle of the road. What happens when you get out in the middle of the road? You get run over. And if you're on that line in the center, you're going to get run over from cars going both ways. You got to pick a lane. Pick one, either for Jesus or against him. And if you're not following Jesus and his ways, then you're following somebody else's. And yet Jesus wants us to give our thinking and our way of life to him and follow him. You're setting yourself up for a fight, and you're going to lose it. You will lose 10 times out of 10 if you go up against God, you go up against Jesus. It's not going to end well for you. And I always come back to the Old Testament when I start thinking about this. I come back to the Old Testament, look at what Israel did. They thought they knew what they were doing. They thought that they could get away with disobeying God. And how well did that end for them? It didn't end very well for them, did it? Starting all the way back with the wanderings when they came out of Egypt. Okay, well, those of you who are born there in Egypt, you guys are going to wander until all of you have died. You will not go in. Okay, Joshua and Caleb, they get to go in. Moses, you get to see the promised land, but you're not going to go in. And see, it didn't end in their favor at all when they disobeyed God. So it's not going to do well for us either. And then look at these parables. They teach us a slightly different points, but they're very similar. The builder of the tower is free to build or not build. It's his choice. It's your choice whether you follow Jesus. Jesus is not going to force you. This is when somebody says, well, if I don't become a Christian, if I don't accept Christ, God should just forgive me. Why? Well, he's a forgiving God, right? Yeah. Think of it this way. Let's see. Let's say that I got to pick a high enough number. Let's say we're all going to live to be 100. That should get us up high enough. How many years would that be from where your age is right now to 100? Mine's going to be about years. Okay, if you don't want to, let's just say, okay, at my age, I'm going to be about 70 years before I reach 100. Did I do that math right? I didn't do that math right. It's going to be about 39. There you go. You got the right answer. If I don't want to live for Jesus and live with Jesus in my life for these 39 years, why would I want to live with him in eternity? Think about it that way. If you don't want to live with him for the limited time we have here on this earth, why would you want to be with him in eternity? So guess what's going to happen? He's going to honor that. You didn't want to be with me on earth? You're not going to be with me in eternity. That's your choice. He's not sending anybody to hell. We send ourselves. We condemn ourselves. We've got to make the choice and make the right choices. So that's the choice there. The king going to war has to make peace or face the consequences. Either I go and I make peace with the king out there that's got an army twice the size of mine, or I'm probably going to get overrun. See, humans, remember, in Romans chapter 5, we were told there that we were at one time enemies of God. So we have to accept peace on his terms. He gets to dictate the terms. That Romans 5, when we were enemies of God, that's when he sent Jesus. When we were helpless and hopeless, he sent Jesus. If it were possible for us to get to God and to be saved based on our own merits, why would he have sent Jesus? Jesus' mission was completely pointless if we could get to God on our own. But because we can't, because we cannot match God on his level of holiness, that's why Jesus came. And when we say, well, no, I'll take a different way, or I'm going to try and live a good life, I'm going to force himself on you. He's not going to force you to love him and to serve him. It is up to you. You have the choice. You have the choice. Paul told the Romans chapter 5, when we were without strength in due time, Christ died for the ungodly. And then he goes down and he says that for when we were enemies with God. See, but God still took care of us. See, that's the ultimate love of enemies. It was when God sent Jesus to take our place, to pay the price for our sins. So let's apply these parables here. Jesus describes the cost of discipleship as something not to be taken lightly. This is why when somebody is baptized, especially a young child, I always wonder, do they really understand what they're doing? Because this is not just something we're doing to join a club. Or to join, it is, by the way, it is biblically impossible to join the church. How do you get in? Acts chapter 2. God what? Added. Daily added. You don't see anywhere in there where it says somebody joined the church. You see sometimes churches will have applications and we have a membership committee that will vote on it. I don't see that anywhere in the Bible. If it's in there, someone's going to have to show it to me. I might have missed it. You never know. But you are added to the church when? When you are baptized into Christ. When you are immersed into Christ, then you are added to the church. God added to you. When you are baptized for the forgiveness of your sins, that's when it happens. Who would build a tower then or a house without first considering the cost? Well, no one would. No one who's thinking. No one who's got their faculties about them. Before I go and buy this house, before I build it, I better make sure I've got the money to do it. Before I go to war, I better make sure I've got the right army and the right equipment for it. Or I'm going to have to find some way to stay out of war. See, what king would start that war? No king would. Kings typically they don't like to lose. In fact, when you look at some of those ancient Middle Eastern cultures, like a lot of the Egyptians and the Assyrians, you don't see a lot of them about their defeats in their chronicles. They didn't want to record them. But we know they lost battles. We've got it in the records of the way of determining that. And how many of us like to talk about our failures? Now, typically we don't. We want to make ourselves look good, look smart. So we're going to try to avoid all that. And any king with common sense would think this through, just like someone considering Christianity. You've got to think about it. You've got to think it through. Because it's foolish to be baptized into Christ without first studying the commitment and thinking about what is involved. And in some ways marriage is a good parallel. When you become a Christian, Jesus expects faithfulness. You get married, your spouse expects faithfulness. Your spouse expects you're not hanging out with the guys. We're not supposed to be running around with our buddies and leaving our wives at home. We're expected to give her our attention now. And when we have kids, take that responsibility too. Just as a Christian, I've got responsibilities as a Christian. See, following Jesus has the potential to change relationships too. I've known 2-3 people who have, because they became a Christian, their families disowned and wouldn't have anything to do with it. And I've known lost friends, people who've had to change jobs. There is something there. There is that cost. There is that potential that has to be considered. And because it requires thought, becoming a Christian is intentional. It's not accidental. Nobody is accidental. Oops! What do you know? I became a Christian. It's not going to work like that. It's intentional. You have to make the decision to, first of all, study it, and then, and now I know what I need to do. Now I've got to make the decision to do it. It is very intentional. It is a deliberate act that becoming a Christian. Discipleship happens when teaching. In other words, it's got to have I think it's possible, and I know of 1 or 2 cases where it's happened, where somebody has read a Bible and decided and figured it out on their own. It's possible. Doesn't happen a whole lot. But mostly, it takes someone to do the teaching. It's not, like I said, only happened once or twice that I know of. And discipleship requires a Christian to teach. It requires the prospect of the student to listen and then make a decision, accept it or reject it. Just like in sales. You present your product and it's up to the customer whether they're going to buy it or not. Kind of like when you buy a new car and you get into it and you just sit there. How's it going to go anywhere? Well, you got to start it up, hit the gas, and put it in gear and go. Same thing with our Christianity. I've got to study it. I've got to make a decision. Okay, I need to do this. I need to be baptized. I need to have Jesus in my life, and I need Jesus to get me, to reconcile me to God. So one has to think very carefully about following Jesus. Very carefully. And a disciple of Jesus has to be willing to give up things that can get in the way. And I'm not just talking about sinful things. Back in the day before I became a Christian, I was at a denominational church, and they'd have the testimonial meetings, where the next person is always trying to make themselves out to be worse than the guy before them. And this one guy, I remember talking about some of the stuff he did. Some of it kind of got into a gray area legally, and what the sacrifice was in giving that up. That's not a sacrifice if you're giving up sin. That's just what's expected of you. A sacrifice might be like the guy, a friend of mine years ago, in the 80s and into the early 90s, to put it kind of in context, he was a nurse working in a private practice making over $100,000 a year. Now, in the late 80s and 90s, that was pretty serious money. That was probably 4 or 5 years' salary for some people, maybe more. But at what cost? It cost him 2 marriages. It cost him a relationship with one of his kids. And eventually he quit that job, went to work for the state, and made about half the money. But he said, I had to learn. Money wasn't the only priority that I had. But I had to learn that lesson the hard way. So that was a sacrifice there, having to give up a much better paying job and take a less paying job that didn't have all the demands on his time, so he could patch things up with his kids. The marriages were over, there wasn't anything he could do about that, but he still had his kids. Sometimes good things can get in the way, like a job or a hobby or a sport. And it just comes down to setting priorities. And that requires thought. What are my priorities? Am I willing to make Jesus my priority so I am assembling with the church when I need to be, so that I'm reading my Bible and studying it when I'm throughout the week, when I'm at home? I've got to make those priorities. I've got to decide what's important. Jesus' point is that if you allow anything to come between you and him, you can't be his disciple. You cannot put father and mother or a spouse or jobs or anything ahead of Jesus. Jesus has got to be the priority. We have to keep those priorities right. I think Jesus, this story here of a man that was working with the Morton Salt Company, how when they took it out of the ground, they had to clean it up. The stuff you put on your table has got to be cleaned up and once it comes out. But he said sometimes they can't get it all clean, so that usually ends up with the stuff that gets put on the roads and things, the impure salt. When it comes to serving Jesus, we've got to make sure we get all the impurities out of us. That's what the gospel is all about. That's what the gospel is going to do for us. We could be like the guy who had the beware of dog sign. Some Christians are like this. Was asked why he had the beware of dog sign there. He said, is your dog that dangerous? He said, well, no. My dog is usually just lying asleep and people trip over him, so I want them to beware of it. Sometimes Christians are that way. We're asleep at the wheel with our Christianity. People don't know we're Christians, but people should know that we are. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a Lutheran minister who ended up in a death camp and was killed by the Nazis, once said that cheap grace is the preaching of forgiveness without requiring repentance, baptism without church discipline, communion without confession, absolution without personal confession. Cheap grace is grace without discipleship, grace without the cross, grace without Jesus Christ living and incarnate. Cheap grace is when we don't take Christianity seriously, is what it comes down to. We've got to take it seriously. So will you help finish as a disciple? Will you help others who are looking to become disciples and not be the stumbling blocks? Lead them to Jesus and not push them away. What's your decision? We've all got to make decisions. If you're not a Christian today, if you've not been baptized into Christ, you got a decision to make. You got to ask yourself a question. Am I ready to make that commitment? If the Lord were to come back right now, do I know without a doubt that I'm ready to go back and be with him for eternity? You got to answer that question for yourself. I can't answer it for you. So what's the answer? We'll stand in a moment and sing as we typically do, and give you an opportunity to think. If you have questions about it, see me afterwards, or talk to somebody, and get your questions answered. Make sure you are right with the Lord, and if we can help you in any way, let us know. Stand as we sing.